What if the most powerful force in a kingdom was never a sword, never a throne, but a single voice that whispered the shape of things to come? From the mist-soaked legends of Celtic Britain, from the ancient bardic traditions that survived in Wales and Cornwall long after the Romans had gone, there comes a figure unlike any other, neither fully mortal nor entirely of the other world. He was born at the edge of mystery and lived there always. A man who could read the turning of ages the way a shepherd reads the weather, who built kingdoms with words before a single stone was laid. They say he walked between worlds. They say he knew Arthur's fate before Arthur drew his first breath. And they say that when he finally vanished, Britain lost something it has never quite found again. Welcome to the story of Merlin. Now lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. The chalk crumbles at the cliff's edge where the sea has been pulling at it for 10,000 years, grain by grain, without hurry. Salt air moves through the old-growth oak and yew behind it, carrying the cold off the water, a cold with mineral weight to it, the kind that settles in the back of the throat. No bird calls yet. The sky holds its breath at the horizon, pale as bone. Something is about to begin. That night, in a stone hall where a single oil lamp threw amber light across the flagstones and no further, Alden knelt before a half-circle of priests. The lamp's clay body was warm against the cold floor, its wick guttering in a draught no one could source. She folded her hands, not in prayer, but to keep them still. Then she spoke. She said a presence had come to her in sleep. No weight, no warmth, no shadow on the wall. Only a certainty, afterward, that something had passed through her. The priests said nothing. One of them looked at her belly, then at his hands. Alden did not look away from the lamp. She was afraid of what she carried. She carried it anyway. Months later, the child came at midnight. The rushes on the floor smelled of dried meadowsweet and wet stone. 3 midwives worked in the orange press of firelight, and then the work was done, and no one spoke. The infant did not cry. He drew one slow breath and opened his eyes. They were the color of rainwater standing in gray slate, and he turned them, one woman to the next, unhurried, as though confirming something he had already known. The midwives stepped back, not in revulsion, in recognition. Alden reached out and took him, and his skin was warmer than a newborn's skin should be. Far to the north, a different kind of trouble was taking shape in the mud. Vortigern stood at the edge of the collapsed foundation, the third one, and said nothing. The hillside smelled of churned clay and crushed bracken, sour and cold. Around him, the wreckage of dressed stone lay half swallowed by gray Welsh earth, each block tilted and sinking as though the hill itself had refused them. His advisers stood behind him, hoods pulled low against the damp. One of them spoke. He said the word quietly, the way men say words they cannot take back. "Blood," he said. "A child's blood poured into the ground. Only then will the tower hold." Vortigern did not turn around. That night, Vortigern sat cross-legged on a wolf pelt inside his tent while his druids worked. They crouched over a dark animal skin mat, scattering the bones, small, bleached, light as chalk, and reading where they fell. The ash they sifted through their fingers left gray streaks across their palms. They were quiet a long time. Then the eldest spoke, a boy born of no father. His blood in the foundation stone. Only that. Vortigern pressed his thumb against the gold ring on his left hand until the knuckle whitened. He said, "Find him." Before dawn, riders were moving south through the dark. By midday, the riders had reached the town. Merlin heard them before he saw them. Iron-shod hooves on dry earth, the creak of leather, the particular silence that falls when a market crowd stops moving all at once. He was crouched near the gate post, turning a smooth gray river stone between his fingers, warm from the sun. The stone had a hole worn clean through its center. He pressed his thumb through it and looked up. A boy from the tanner's yard stepped close and said it loud enough for others to hear, "Bastard child, no father, devil-born." The words hung in the dusty air. Merlin did not answer. He closed his fist around the stone. Across the square, one of the riders was already asking questions. That night they were brought into Vortigern's hall. Torchlight ran along the walls and stopped short of the corners, where the dark stayed cold and smelled of old stone and something burned long ago, pine resin perhaps, or bone. Vortigern sat in a chair of rough-hewn oak, its arms worn pale from use, and spoke without raising his voice. "The tower falls," he said. "The mages have given their reason. The boy must bleed into the foundation before another stone is laid." He said it the way a man announces rain. Alden's hand tightened around Merlin's wrist until the tendons showed white. Merlin felt the pressure of her grip, the trembling she was trying to contain, and said nothing. He looked at Vortigern steadily, at the heavy rings, the fur-trimmed cloak, the certainty in the man's face, and what crossed his own expression was not fear. It was something quieter than that, and worse. Then Merlin spoke. His voice was steady, and it carried, not loudly, but cleanly, the way a stone dropped in still water carries its rings to every bank. He told Vortigern that the mages were wrong, not mistaken. Wrong. The tower did not fall for want of blood. Beneath the hill, 2 dragons slept, one red, one white, coiled in stone chambers older than the hill itself, and their dreaming shook the ground. Every foundation laid above them would crack. Every stone raised would fall. Alden's grip on his wrist had loosened. He felt the release of it. "Let your mages go down into the earth," Merlin said, "and look." He held Vortigern's gaze the entire time. The heavy gold rings, the fur-trimmed cloak, none of it moved. Neither did Merlin, a child standing before a king's silence and not flinching. Vortigern said nothing for a long moment. Then he raised one hand. By torchlight, the diggers broke through. The sound reached the surface first, a deep, wet crack, then nothing, then rushing water, then screaming, though not from pain. Vortigern descended himself. Merlin followed. The chamber beneath the hill was vast, its ceiling lost in dark, the underground pool black and absolutely still, until it wasn't. The torchlight caught the water shivering. Then the surface split. The white one came first, long, pale, muscular, coiling upward through the dark water with its mouth open wide. The red rose behind it, already turning, already striking. They met mid-air above the pool in a sound like wet rope snapping taut against stone. No one spoke. One torch dropped and went out where it hit the water. The 2 dragons thrashed and locked and fell back beneath the surface and rose again, and the water hit the cave walls in flat, cold sheets that soaked every man standing there to the bone. Vortigern stood at the pool's edge. His gold rings caught the remaining torchlight. He did not step back. Merlin watched the king's face, not the dragon's. Then the red dragon rose alone. It broke the surface slowly, water sheeting from its flanks in dark ribbons. The white dragon gone, pressed back into whatever depth the earth kept for such things. The pool stilled. Smoke curled from the water where the white had been, thin and bitter, carrying the smell of scorched iron and wet stone. Vortigern had not moved. Merlin turned to face him. "The red is Britain," he said. "The white is you, and everything you took." He let that sit. "The sons of Constance are alive. They are coming, and they will not stop at your border." Vortigern's gold rings caught the torchlight. His jaw tightened once, then held. Merlin felt no satisfaction in this, only the weight of a truth already finished, handed to a man too proud to receive it. 3 nights later, the valley lit up. Uther and Aurelius came down from the north with torches and pitch, and they did not need to break Vortigern's gate. The garrison had already fled, men who had heard the prophecy carried out of that cavern by every mouth that passed through it. The fortress walls stood empty when the fire reached the timber interior, and the tower caught from the bottom up orange light climbing stone in long wavering sheets. Across the valley floor, the blaze was a single burning column against a moonless sky. Vortigern did not come out. The tower stood for a long time before it fell, stubbornly, the way heavy things resist their endings. Then the upper stones gave way, and the sound reached the valley a moment after the sight of it, a low percussive crack that rolled across the wet grass and faded into the dark hills beyond. By the time Merlin found the command tent, the smell of the burning still clung to his robe, scorched pine resin and wet ash. Uther Pendragon was already inside. He stood at a table spread with vellum maps, but he was not looking at the maps. He was looking at the tent flap through which Merlin had just stepped. The bronze dragon at his shoulder caught the torchlight and held it. His hands were flat on the table, thick-fingered, the knuckles split from something recent. He did not speak a greeting. He waited, the way a man waits who has decided in advance what he intends to take. Merlin felt it immediately, not fear, precisely, though fear was threaded through it. Something else moved beneath, the recognition of a hunger he had seen before in men who wanted the future handed to them like a sword. Weeks passed before Aurelius summoned him. The new king wanted a monument, something permanent, he said, for the men swallowed by the Saxon wars, something the land itself would remember. Merlin stood alone on Salisbury Plain the following dawn, the frost-stiffened grass crunching faintly beneath his boots with each small shift of his weight. He pressed the heel of his staff into the half-frozen earth and felt the resistance in his palm, the ground not yet ready to release winter. He had already decided. Not local stone. The Giant's Ring in Ireland, great sarsen slabs quarried by people whose names were gone, each one requiring 40 men to lift and achieving nothing. No army would move them. Merlin would not use an army. He crouched and pressed one bare hand flat against the frozen ground. Cold bit his knuckles. He held it there, reading something in the stillness, the way a physician reads a pulse, not listening for what the earth said, but for what it was willing to do.
Breathe out loud.
3 months later, the first stone stood upright on Salisbury Plain. Merlin had not conjured it there. He had drawn maps by candlelight, calculated the pull of braided oxhide ropes against wet timber sledges, and spoken quietly to the men who agreed to try. They came from 4 villages. None of them fully believed it could be done. Each stone took 11 days. Ropes creaked under tension the listener could feel in their forearms just watching. The limestone ground against packed chalk as the slab tilted degree by slow degree until gravity made its decision and the upright dropped into the prepared socket with a concussion that passed through the soles of every man's feet and up through their knees. Then the next. Merlin stood each dawn at the ring's eastern edge, counting what remained, watching the low gold light catch the faces of the uprights already set, sarsen gray, rough-grained, furred with cold. When the final stone seated, he did not call out. He pressed his palm to its surface. The rock held the night's cold deep in its body, indifferent to everything it had taken to bring it here. He left his hand there a long moment. Then he walked home. Some weeks after the last stone was set, Uther came to Merlin's fire alone. He sat without being invited, pulled his red cloak tight against the night wind, and looked toward the dark outline of Tintagel on its headland across the water. He did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice was level, the voice of a man who had rehearsed what he intended to say. He had seen Igraine at the feast of Duke Gorloy, he said. He could not stop seeing her. Merlin turned a stick in the fire. Sparks lifted and scattered on the wind. Uther wanted Merlin's help to reach her. Not to petition Gorlois, to reach her. The wind pressed cold against the left side of Merlin's face. He looked at the king, at the bronze dragon brooch catching firelight at his shoulder, at the set of his jaw, and understood that the asking was a formality. Uther had already decided. He was not requesting. He was informing. Across the water behind Tintagel's walls, Igraine was not sleeping. She moved from the eastern window to the door and back again, her bare feet silent on the cold limestone, the smell of salt and wet stone rising from below where the waves broke and withdrew in the dark. Gorlois had locked her here to keep her safe. She understood now that safe and kept meant the same thing. The war was her name. It had always been her name. She pressed one palm flat against the stone wall and felt the whole cliff shudder as a wave struck the base far below. A dull, rising pressure moving up through the rock and into her hand and wrist and arm. She held it. She did not pull away. Not far below, in the sea cave, Merlin was already working. The granite bowl sat wedged between two rocks, its interior dark with old use. He ground something into it, dried root, chalk pale and brittle, the scraping loud against the cave walls where the sound had nowhere to go. Salt spray settled on his forearms. The cold was the kind that enters bone. Uther stood behind him, watching. I can give you his face, Merlin said, without turning. His voice. His hands. The grinding stopped. The child conceived tonight is mine, to take, to raise as I choose. The wave that struck the cave entrance filled every silence between them with white noise, and then withdrew. Yes, Uther said. He did not hesitate. He did not ask what Merlin intended, or why, or what kind of man would want such a thing. He simply paid the price, the way a man pays who has already decided, long before the asking. An hour later, Merlin stood on the cliff above Tintagel. The sea wind pressed his robe flat against his chest and pulled his white hair sideways. Below, the castle torches burned in their brackets, orange light sliding across wet stone. He watched the gates open. He watched the figure pass through. Uther wearing another man's face, another man's walk, another man's right to enter. The gates closed. Merlin did not move. The wind kept pulling at him. Somewhere beneath him the sea struck the cliff base and fell back, struck and fell back, indifferent to what had just been set in motion. By dawn, the fog had moved in from the sea and settled against Tintagel's gate like a held breath. Merlin waited below the arch, his robe damp through to the shoulder. The stone beneath his feet was slick with it. The gate opened without sound. Igraine stood in the gap, her dark braid loosened, her blue gown creased at the waist, where she had been lying down not long ago. She held out a bundle wrapped in undyed wool. The cloth was plain, the weight of it very small, the warmth of it immediate through Merlin's cold hands. She said nothing. He said nothing. Somewhere behind her, inside, a lamp had been extinguished. She turned back through the gate before it closed. "3 hours of forest track later, Merlin stepped into the courtyard of Sir Ector's manor and lifted the lantern hook with one knuckle. Ector appeared at the door before the second knock, a stocky man in an unlaced tunic, squinting against the dark. He looked at Merlin. He looked at the bundle. Merlin held it out. Ector's broad hands closed around the wool without hesitation, and the small weight settled against his chest. He looked down at the sleeping face for a long moment, then back up. "Your own son," Merlin said, "from tonight." Ector nodded once, the way a man nods when he has understood something he will not ask about, and stepped back through the door. Years passed. Arthur grew in the way that boys grow when no one tells them they are remarkable, unevenly, quietly, through small defeats. In Sir Ector's training yard, he lost to the wooden dummies more mornings than he won. his grip still finding the wrong angle at the last moment, the practiced sword jarring back against his wrist, with a sting he refused to show. But he was the boy who stopped before entering the stable, listening first for which horse was unsettled. The boy who crouched to return a fallen starling to its nest rather than let the yard dogs find it. From the tree line, Merlin watched. He kept his distance across those years, watching the boy fail, recover, and fail again, carrying both the certainty of what Arthur was and the fear, quiet and persistent, that he had been wrong. Far to the south, Uther Pendragon died before the candles burned down. No speech, no named heir, only the long rattling exhale of a man whose wars had hollowed him out from the inside, and then stillness, the kind that arrives when a chest stops its rising and everything in the room adjusts to the new weight of the air. Through the open doorway, the throne sat empty. By morning, 6 lords had sent riders. By the following week, 3 had declared themselves king. The land that Uther had bled to hold began pulling apart at its oldest seams. The same seams, the same darkness. Returning, "3 days after the lords declared war on one another, Merlin arrived in London before the frost had lifted from the churchyard grass. He carried the sword wrapped in oiled wool. It was not heavy, a single-handed blade, plain crossguard grip wound in dark leather, but he had been careful with it. He set the limestone block himself, fitted the iron anvil to its surface, and drove the blade in with one deliberate downward press of both palms. The steel did not ring. It sank and held. He wrote the inscription. Then he stepped back into the crowd gathered at the churchyard wall and became simply a tall old man in a gray robe. The First Lord gripped the hilt with both hands. His knuckles whitened. He planted his boot against the stone and hauled. Nothing moved. 5 more came, then 7. Merlin watched each one, his pale eyes steady, his hands folded inside his wide sleeves. Relief and grief sat in him without resolution. Relief that none of them was Arthur. Grief that Arthur was not yet here to know what waited for him. Two mornings later, the churchyard was empty. Arthur found it that way. No crowd, no lords, no sound but the creak of frost-stiffened grass beneath his boots and the distant bark of a dog somewhere beyond the church wall. He had come for a sword. Kay had left his own at the inn, and the tournament would not wait, and Arthur was the younger brother, so Arthur was the one sent back. He read the inscription without ceremony, the way a boy reads a sign above a gate. A sword was a sword. He closed his right hand around the grip. The leather was cold, stiff against his palm. He pulled, not hard, not braced, just the casual pull of a boy reaching for something left on a shelf. The blade came free. His elbow swung back into empty air, and his left boot skidded on the frost-slicked stone. He caught himself, heart loud in his chest, the sword hanging at his side in one hand. The churchyard was still empty. No one had seen. Word spread by afternoon. The churchyard filled with men in iron, lords from Cornwall, Lothian, Orkney, their breath clouding in the cold air above their beards. Kay had told someone. Someone had told everyone. Arthur drew the sword again. No one cheered. A lord from the north laughed, a short, dry sound through his nose. Another said the name Ector like a dismissal. A third leaned toward his companion and spoke without lowering his voice. Bastard-born, no doubt, or worse. Arthur stood with the blade at his side and said nothing. The grip was warm now from his palm. His jaw tightened. Just once, a muscle pulling beneath the skin, and then his face went very still. Not calm, still. Then Merlin walked out of the crowd. No announcement, no raised hand, just a lean old figure in a gray wool robe moving through ironclad men who stepped aside without quite knowing why until he stood at Arthur's left shoulder. He faced the lords. "This is Uther's son." His voice carried without effort, dry, unhurried, the way a stone wall carries weight. Born of Igraine, given into keeping the Knight of Tintagel, to be kept until Britain needed him. He said nothing more. The lord from the north stopped breathing mid-exhale. The man who had spoken Ector's name like a dismissal closed his mouth. Even the wind off the Thames seemed to pause, not silence described, but the cessation of every small sound that had filled the square a moment before. Arthur did not look at Merlin. He stood straight, the sword at his side, and waited. Later, when the lords had drawn apart to argue among themselves, Arthur found a low stretch of stone wall away from the noise and sat. Merlin settled beside him. "Why keep it secret?" Arthur asked. "Why Ector's house? Why not just a prince raised in a palace?" Merlin said, "Learns only how to be obeyed." He picked up a pebble from the frozen ground, turned it once between his fingers, and set it down. You needed to know hunger before authority, doubt before certainty. You needed to be wrong in front of people who loved you anyway. He paused. A king who has never been ordinary cannot be trusted with the extraordinary. Arthur was quiet for a moment. The shouting of the lords carried across the cold air. "And now?" he said. "Now," Merlin said, "you are both." Weeks later, the great hall of Camelot stood open to the sky at one end, its roof half finished, and the floor was thick with sawdust and the smell of fresh-cut oak. Torchlight caught the chalk line Merlin had drawn himself, a circle wide enough to seat 40 men, with no end and no beginning. Arthur stood at its edge and looked in. "No high seat," Merlin said. "No head of the table. Every man who sits here speaks with the same weight." Arthur crouched and pressed 2 fingers to the chalk line. The dust was cold. He held that position a moment, feeling, perhaps, what the circle meant before he found the words for it. "They won't like it," he said. "The lords." "No," Merlin agreed. "They won't." Arthur stood. He looked at the circle, then at Merlin. "Build it," he said. The round table was still being fitted when word came that Guinevere's procession had been sighted on the road south. Merlin was standing at Camelot's gate when she arrived. Roses and yellow broom had been scattered across the paving stones, and the heat pressed down through the linen of his robe. The cart slowed. Guinevere stepped down without waiting for a hand. One movement, deliberate, and looked up at the walls before she looked at anyone in them. Merlin felt the old knowing stir behind his sternum, sharp and unwelcome. He had seen this love. He had seen where it ended, a kingdom cracked through its center, a chair empty at the round table, and Arthur riding north into rain that never lifted. Guinevere turned and caught his eye. He bowed. He said nothing. That evening, Merlin found Arthur alone in his study, bent over a spread of vellum maps, a stub of tallow candle burning near his right hand. Merlin told him plainly, not that Guinevere was faithless, she was not, but that the world had forces in it older than any vow, and that in time a man would come who would not mean to pull at what Arthur had built, and could not help doing so. Arthur set down the bronze stylus he had been holding. He did not look up immediately. Then he looked up. "Merlin," he said, and his voice was warm in the way a door is warm when it is being closed. "Enough." Merlin stopped. He had seen this too, had known exactly how far the words would travel before they met that wall, and had said them anyway. Not far from where Arthur's door had closed, Morgan Le Fay sat alone in her tower room with 12 candles burning low and a grimoire open across her knees, its pages the color of old teeth, its ink a dark reddish brown that had never quite dried to black. She had not learned from Merlin. She had learned from a woman in the Gwent forest who kept bones in her apron pocket and knew the names of things that had no Latin translation. She had learned from a grimoire smuggled out of a burning monastery in a wool sack. She had learned by watching, by waiting, by asking the questions that no one at court thought to ask. Her right forefinger traced a line of text without touching it. She had been born on the wrong side of a king's ambition. Everything built here, the hall, the table, the great shining idea of it, had been built on the erasure of her mother's will. Merlin knew this. Arthur did not. She closed the grimoire with both hands. Deliberate, unhurried. Some days later, Merlin found himself at the lake's edge, though he could not have said afterward what had drawn him there rather than home. She was crouched at the waterline, one bare foot pressing into the wet mud, watching a lily pad rock on a disturbance she had made. Auburn hair, loose and damp at the ends. She did not startle at the crack of his staff on a root. "You move the water," she said, "and it tells you where the edge of the thing is, the boundary." She looked up. "Is that how you learned?" Merlin had not been asked how he learned anything in 30 years. He sat down on a mossy limestone shelf above the waterline, his staff across his knees, and felt the stone's cold press through his robe. He did not answer immediately. He was not certain he trusted why he wanted to. That autumn, Nimue came to Camelot. She found a corner of Merlin's tower workshop and quietly became part of it, the way a draft finds the gap under a door without announcement. Merlin taught her. He had not meant to teach her everything, but generosity is its own momentum, and she asked the right questions in the right order. He showed her how woven words could slow a heartbeat, how absence, named precisely, becomes a container, how sleep, if called by its oldest name, does not end, it waits. She listened with her whole body still and her right hand moving. The dried yarrow and meadowsweet overhead released their faint, chalky scent into the cold night air. A candle guttered on the work table between them. Nimue's quill scratched across vellum, a small wet sound, and Merlin, watching the stars through the open window, did not look down at the page. Weeks later, Arthur sat alone at the round table. No candles. One torch, guttering in its iron bracket, casting a thin orange bar across the oak. He had not called for light, had simply stopped moving when the great hall emptied after the council and let the dark settle around him like sediment. Merlin found him there past midnight. Arthur's hands were flat on the table's surface, pressing down as though testing whether it would hold. He did not look up. The torch hissed. A knot of pine resin popped, and the flame dipped, then recovered. "They will not agree," Arthur said. "Not to Merlin. To the wood." Merlin stood a few paces back and said nothing. The cold off the flagstones rose through the soles of his boots. Arthur's shoulders carried a new weight. Not grief exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a man who has just understood, for the first time, that the work is longer than he is. Merlin left Arthur to the dark. Back in his tower, he set the candle on the stone ledge and did not sit. He stood at the window. The sky was a sealed thing. No stars, no moon, no seam of light anywhere. He had kept the vision at the edge of his mind for almost a year. Held it the way a tongue holds back from a broken tooth. He let it come. Himself sleeping, not dead. The breath still moved his chest, but absent, removed. The hawthorn grown thick around him, white blossoms pressing against his closed face. The air in that place cold and carrying the faint sweetness of standing water. He saw no rescue. The candle flame did not move. The tower was perfectly still. Merlin stood without shifting his weight for a long time, his hands loose at his sides, and understood that he had already known, that the year of keeping it away had not been doubt. It had been courtesy, extended, without quite admitting it, to himself. Nimue came to his door before midnight and did not knock. She simply opened it, and Merlin was already standing with his staff in hand. They walked to the lake without speaking. The hawthorn at the waterline had begun to bloom, white blossoms, out of season, the petals giving off a faint sweetness that settled low in the cold air. Merlin stopped at the water's edge and felt the mud take the weight of his boots. Nimue turned to face him. Her silver bracelet caught nothing. There was no light to catch. She spoke the words. His words, shaped by her mouth, returning to him the way water returns to its source, changed, but carrying the same current. The hawthorn moved without wind. Branch by branch it came, the bark cold and faintly damp against his hands, his shoulders, his chest. He did not resist. The last thing he felt was the soft press of blossoms against his face, and the cold, and beneath it, very faintly, relief. Years passed beneath the hawthorn's roots. At the round table, the empty seats came one by one. First Lancelot's, then the others, each absence a different kind of silence. The way a chord played wrong is different from no chord at all. Guinevere was gone by autumn. Arthur did not speak of it. He sat at the great curved oak and pressed his thumb along a scar in its grain, back and forth until the wood was warm. The fellowship had not broken. It had simply thinned. Autumn light fell through the high windows in long, pale columns, catching the dust that moved across the empty chairs. Arthur did not look up. Outside, somewhere, a rook called once and stopped. He sat alone in the hall Merlin had built, at the table Merlin had imagined, holding the kingdom Merlin had handed him. And it was not enough, and it was everything. And he had always known both things would be true. And so the hawthorn held him. Snow came first, dry and fine, settling into the bark's ridges without melting. Then the white flowers opened, the same ones that had pressed against his face at the last, though he could not feel them now. Summer thickened the leaves to a dark, waxy green. Autumn took them one by one. Merlin did not dream. He simply was, held between heartbeats, between one breath and the next that never came. The centuries moved the way rivers move stone, without announcing themselves. England forgot his name in the mouths of its people, and remembered it in the foundations of its churches, its standing stones, its oldest roads. Children stopped being told the stories. Then the stories were written down, which is what happens when a thing passes from living memory into something quieter. Every spring, without instruction, the hawthorn bloomed. White petals opened above still water. They fell when the wind asked them to, turning slowly as they settled on the surface, and the lake received them and was still.